Welcome into a Locked On Phillies crossover episode. Today, I talked to Sully, Paul Francis Sullivan from Locked On MLB. We had a great conversation about the nature of Philadelphia fans, what the Phillies are doing this season, and what expectations should be for the club. Let's jump into it.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. This Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com and Locked On Sports. Listeners get $50 off any purchase of $500. Use code Locked On at checkout.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you can read my lower third, you know you can call me Sully. Today's episode is being dropped on the 27th day of April, 2022. Thanks so much for making us your first listen, as we're available for free on all your free podcasting catchers. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On MLB Pods. Same handle for Instagram. And you can follow me. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Well, today's show, we have yet another crossover, and we're doing with someone who's brand new, a brand new friend to the show, and someone who's not been part of the Locked On Podcast Network for that long, but he has it's going to be the fun task, because whatever happens this year, this team's going to be fun to watch. And it's a team that, has a little soft spot in my heart. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for this club, and this particular incarnation of the team is no different. I'm talking about the Philadelphia Phillies. And my guest today is the new host of Locked On Phillies. Let's bring him aboard. Hey, it's Connor Thomas. How you doing, man?
Hey, Sully, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm all right. I'm sitting here. I'm doing another episode from my classroom. So I'm going to take you to school, young man.
Sounds great.
There's a pop quiz here. Whereabouts, if I were to go over there to my globe that I have here in my classroom, and I take one of these pins I have over here, and I put a pin in the globe exactly where you are, where would that pin be?
It'd be easy to find. It'd be in the great city of Philadelphia right now, in South Philly.
All right. Well, I was about to sing some of the songs from 1776, but I don't want to get the Locked On Podcast Network in trouble with copyright infringement. First of all, I'm a big Revolutionary War buff, native New Englander, and I love reading about the American Revolution. So, especially after college, I got into a huge Revolutionary War kick. Read Page Adams' John Adams novel, Page Smith's John Adams novel. All these, I couldn't get enough, couldn't shove enough Revolutionary War stuff into my brain. And so when I went down to Philly to Independence Hall.
Yeah.
That was me going to Disneyland.
That's
To me, I just loved I had goosebumps knowing that this is where not just the Declaration of Independence, but also the Constitution was ratified. This is where Franklin and Jefferson and Adams and Sherman and Livingston were banging out the Declaration of Independence and all this stuff. And I was humming the score from 1776 as I was walking around the place. So I love Philadelphia. It isn't just because of Rocky. It isn't just because of 12 Monkeys. It isn't just because of 1776. But I love it there. So I'm a little bit older than you. You probably are too young to remember the Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton glory days. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's a little bit before my time. Just missed them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's it for Locked On MLB. It's good talking with you. But I'm assuming you were there for the utterly Howard, Hamill's glory years.
Yeah, so that was my childhood baseball team. Was really that Utley, Howard, and Rollins core with
Right.
Cole Hamill sprinkled in there, and the four aces at the end. So yeah, I grew up on those guys.
Yeah. Well, and briefly, my favorite player of all time played for them. That would be Pedro Martinez, but he was no longer Pedro the Great when he was there. That's an interesting team in terms of Philadelphia lore. I remember I was doing an iteration. This wasn't Locked On MLB. It was with the show Sully Baseball I had before it. I did Locked On MLB. And during that 2011 season, I had a couple of big-time Philly fans, including the writer Michael Ferraro, and we were talking a lot, and I was saying, if this Phillies team, and that was the year where they had both Lee and Halladay, because remember, Lee was not part of the 2010 team, and Halladay was not part of the 2009 team, but they had Lee and Halladay and Hamels and
Roy Oswalt as well.
Roy Oswalt, and they also, I mean, they still had Utley, and they still had Howard, and they still had Ruiz, and they still, I mean, they still had the core of that team together. I said that if that team won the World Series, and boy, it looked like they were going to, if that team had won the World Series, you could have made an argument that that Phillies run would have been the greatest Philadelphia sports run ever. I mean, I had to really stop and think. Broad Street Bullies, the Dr. J era, I can't count Connie Mack and all of them. I can't count anything pre-integration. Like the Pete Rose, Mike Schmidt Phillies. If that team had won the second title, I think they would have laid the claim to this is the greatest Philadelphia team of all time. And it didn't work out. But what is the feeling people have of that team? I'm sure it's beloved.
Oh, absolutely. Because championships are not, of course, you're a native New Englander, you know how it goes up there and how it's been over the past 15, 20 years. Like, championships are not as plentiful in Philadelphia. So when you win one at all, you immediately become a larger than life figure. But there's been an interesting thing, because I do sports talk radio in Philly is my day job. Right. And there's been an interesting narrative with that core that's kind of popped up. They've gone from, well, they could have been on the greatest run in the history of Philadelphia sports to now they're almost not, I don't want to say resented. That's much too strong of a word, but for only bringing home one championship with the talent they had on that roster, there are people that feel like that team ultimately came up short of expectations. There's some people that, again, don't resent it, but look back on that era. Sure, 2008 was amazing, but the subsequent years were failures by people that believed that team was good enough to win back-to-back when they went in 2009, another one in 2011 with that pitching staff and that roster they still had. So it's an interesting dynamic. As we get further away, people look back and think, man, I wish we would have gotten two more out of that team.
It's interesting. It kind of reminds me, and I know you're a Philadelphia guy, so you may not want to hear this, but it reminds me of the Mets of 1986, and which is, I mean, that I was 14 years old when that World Series happened and living in Massachusetts. So you might figure, if you're wondering how I felt about it, watch the HBO documentary Curse of the Bambino that features your pal Sully and my thoughts of the 1986 World Series. I digress. There's a lot of feelings that Mets team, that Mets year is beloved, but there is that sense that the team that had Gooden, Strawberry, Keith Hernandez, Gary Carter, Ron Darling, Sid Fernandez, Bobby Ojeda, Lenny Dykstra, Wally Bay, all those players, and that they lost the division to a banged-up Cardinals team the next year, and they lost the pennant the next year to a Dodger team who should not have even been on the same field with them. There is a sense that team came up short in its expectations. And the thing that I find interesting about what you were saying, that sounded very similar. That's why it was reminded of that. The thing that I find interesting about what happened with the Phillies team is they weren't expected to win that year in 08.
No, they weren't.
The Cubs were. Remember, the Cubs had the best record of the National League. It's their time. We had the Red Sox time, the White Sox time, and guess what? It's Cub time. And they got swept by Los Angeles. and the Phillies beat a pretty good Brewers team
with a great CC Sabathia at that point too.
I called it the rental car season because they rented him and they treated him like a rental car in Las Vegas. Like every game was a complete game. You're only here for 2 months. We're going to squeeze every inning out of you. And Brett Myers, I believe that was when he hit the home run off of Sabathia in the playoffs.
Yeah. That was a great one. And then Shane Victorino with the grand slam off of him as well.
That's right.
A huge moment in that series.
And then they went up again. They didn't have to face Chicago, so they faced an LA team that was okay, but they were clearly better than them. And then they faced Tampa, who got ahead of the Red Sox. And most people were picking Tampa before the World Series began, and I picked the Phillies because I thought I just was bitter that they beat the Red Sox. But the team they weren't expecting to win won. And then the years that they were expected to win, they came up short. They lost to that Yankee team. Of course, if they had won that game 4, I think they probably would have won the World Series. I think 2010 was a bit of a wash because that Giants team that won had the pitching staff that matched up with the Phillies pitching staff. My father, may rest in peace, was so in love with that. He was a San Francisco Giant fan till the end. And I don't think Phillies fans should kick themselves over that one because, that was Lincecum, Kane, Bumgarner. That matched up with them. But losing to that Cardinal team in 2011, I keep thinking they won the first game and they were up like 5-1 or something in game 2. And I remember thinking they're going to win this series in 2 and it's a best of 5.
It felt like that. And I think everybody in Philadelphia still has nightmares of Ryan Howard laying just slightly up the first base line, clutching the back of his leg with the Achilles injury. It just felt like it was silent in that ballpark. I don't know how to explain what happened. 1-0 as well. Like in that closeout game, how do you not score a run with that type of pitching performance you got?
Yeah, and of course they didn't have a winning season until last year. I mean, there was no metaphor for a team I've ever seen in my life that Ryan Howard collapsing at home plate and then the Phillies falling into obscurity. But I have to say though, and there are similar things that people say about the Atlanta Braves going on that great run. They only won that one World Series. Earl Weaver only won that one World Series. Billy Martin only won that one World Series. But I kind of have to take issue to that because especially in this day and age when you have to go through 3 rounds, I don't 100% adhere to the mentality that it's a total crapshoot. I think you have to have a team that's designed to play 162 games, and then once you get there, you have to mix and match. There seems to be ways you can win, especially if you have a deep bullpen. But the fact of the matter is that a bounce here or a bounce there against New York, a bounce here or a bounce there against St. Louis, and they're going to the World Series again. I mean, I have a hard time taking them to task for not winning more than one because the deck is so stacked against them. And you're a Phillies fan. Thank God you're not like the way the Indians were in the 90s where they had a great team year in and year out and they never won it once.
Absolutely. And that's why when I brought it up, I kind of said lately there's become this narrative. So what I think it really is the descent that they had after that run. Some teams, like you look at like the St. Louis Cardinals, who they're just constantly, they'll have better teams than other years every once in a while. You know how it goes. Like sometimes they're up, but they're never quite all that way down. They followed up that era of incredible success that built a generation of baseball fans like myself, like my generation. And then they went through the slow descent of World Series, NLCS, NLDS, no playoffs, and just full down into the gutter. And I think that 10-year playoff drought that we're currently in the midst of has created that narrative where now there's that generation that fell in love with that team is somewhat bitter with Phillies baseball because of the failures of what Ruben Amaro did down the stretch at the end of that roster, trying to keep guys there too long. A lot of people felt that the Matt Klentak era in the more recent years where you have a couple years of just terrible drafting, a depletion of a farm system. So I think that narrative's kind of more of what's happened since that era of baseball. And thinking, man, it would have been easier to get through these past 10 years if they had won one or two more.
Well, one of the things, though, and Phillies fans have to be reminded of this, is that they got that ring. They got that ring, and it is a special moment in that team's life and in those fans' life that is expressed with jewelry. And if you want to express life special moments with jewelry, let me recommend you go to BlueNile.com. Whether it's everyday fine jewelry like cocktail rings, tennis bracelet, or a beautiful wedding ring or band, BlueNile.com has you covered. They're the original online jeweler. Since 1999, they've been helping millions of couples create their perfect engagement ring. BlueNile.com offers expert advice 24/7 with legendary service and 30-day returns. When you commit to a piece, so does BlueNile.com. They have guaranteed service and repair for life and the diamond price guarantee. Contact Blue Nile to compare a competitor's diamond against one of Blue Nile's, and in most cases, it will be matched, maybe even beaten, okay? And for the most part, Blue Nile can deliver overnight. Orders are insured and arrives in a discreet package, so it won't give away what's inside. Now, you got to think about the call to order, which is somewhere here. Hey, here it is. This Mother's Day, give Mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On MLB listeners will get $50 off any purchase of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive is good through Mother's Day. Use code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, discreet packaging. Boom. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com. Thanks for making Locked On MLB your first listen. Your second listen, that better be Locked On Phillies. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, recaps of MLB games with analysis from our local experts, taking fans through the season like no other network, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I stumbled through that like Ryan Howard falling in a heap.
But that was a great lead-in. The great lead-in to the ad was what carried it. That was like Ryan Madsen setting up Brad Lidge back in the day. It was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I didn't serve one up the pool holes. Let me tell you, By the way, I'm convinced that Brad Lidge made a deal with the devil.
Oh, absolutely. How do you go perfect that year? And then it was crazy.
It was crazy. But hey, speaking of deals with the devil, let's talk about the Philadelphia Phillies. Look, it's way too early. It's way too early to get, I think, angry about anything. And I think that the track record that both Dombrowski and Girardi have should make people say, hey, let's not go bananas here, even though the Phillies, who are playing right now against, as we're recording this, are playing against the Colorado Rockies. So neither you nor I know what's going to happen in that game. That being said, best case scenario, they're going to be 8-10. Worst case scenario, they're going to be 7-11. Get a Slurpee. Not a sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. But, yeah, they're off to a crummy start. And one reason they're off to a crummy start is Zach Wheeler is stunk. When you have your ace stink, that sort of thing happens. We saw Nola pitched well. Gibson had at least one really good game. I think that and Knebel and Hand have been pretty good out of the bullpen so far. So, Harper has not been great, but he's driving in a lot of runs, which I know I'm not supposed to pay attention to, but that does help you win games. Obviously we remember what happened with the Phillies last year, that they briefly were the team in first to take away the division from the Mets until they decided that it was probably best to have the Atlanta Braves win it. But I think this team, this is a flawed division. I think the Mets are off to a great start. The last time they went off to a great start was last year. And I think this is the team that could contend for the division or maybe one of the wild card spots if everything comes together. What's the mood there in Philadelphia for the team? Obviously, they can't be thrilled with how they've started it, but they haven't hit the panic button yet, have they?
You know what? Some people are reaching for it already. And part of that is just the nature of Philadelphia sports fan. You're a New Englander, you're a Northeast guy. You know how
Yeah.
it is here. It's a lot more tense as far as a fan base is concerned. And when you come in with this expectation, you go into the luxury tax for the first time in Phillies history, and you spend on guys like Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber to come in. The expectations are okay, we're all in. That playoff drought ends this year. And so they immediately come under a microscope for probably the first month of the season. And then as the summer rolls around, people settle in, people start like it'll be the dog days of summer, a lot less tense, and they'll allow the team to develop more. But it's that first couple weeks microscope coupled with you lose 4 of your first 5 series on the year after going out and spending that money. And the main thing people are pointing to is Joe Girardi. A lot of people around here, I've had a couple people, a couple sports talk show hosts talk to me and say, is Girardi possibly getting fired if they get swept by the Brewers prior to that Brewers series that they just played at home?
Right.
Which is a crazy thought, being that that was the 5th series of the year. But it's what people are saying here. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's very hasty, but it's just that early season microscope for a team that hasn't had a lot of success recently. And now you feel like you're close. So every failure, every lost series feels a little bit bigger in the minds of fans. So they're certainly zoned in on this team. And it's impatience because of the time that they've already spent over the past decade of Phillies baseball missing the playoffs. It's like this has to be the year, or I don't know what's going to happen. Even though, of course, last year had to be the year, and the year before that had to be the year. So this fan base will keep coming back. It's a passionate baseball town, but right now the microscope's certainly on them, and there's a feeling, like I said, of impatience around here.
Well, and I think there's a couple of things that probably adds to the impatience. The fact that the Mets are off to such a great start,
For sure.
that it's the Mets. If it was the Marlins, then I think maybe it would be less of a stick in the eye. But the fact that it's the Mets off to this great start, and I'm talking to a lot of Mets fans. I know a lot of Met fans. Please don't judge me, but I know a lot of Met fans who feel because of what happened last year that they were in first place for about 2/3 of the season, more than 2/3 of the season, and they finished the season with a losing record, a sub 500 record, despite being in first place and with virtually no competition for the first 2/3 of the season, and that the team that leapfrogged them got a parade, and they kind of looking at that parade thinking that should have been us. I'm sure there's a little bit of that going on with the Phillies fans. The one thing I would say, the many thing I would say that would talk them off the ledge is not just the fact that Girardi has a good track record. Dombrowski has a good track record. And this is really Girardi's second full season as the manager of the Phillies. The first year was the COVID year, and you almost have to take that with a grain of salt because, it was just 60 games. It's like imagine, where you're at in the season around Memorial Day, and that's how we're going to judge your entire year. So they did have a winning year for the first time since Ryan Howard fell in a heap under Girardi. And so I would just say that, look at, this is what, 2.5 weeks into the season of a shortened, with a shortened spring training. The key is if Wheeler finds his groove and Nola continues to pitch well, I have no question. I have no hesitation that the offense. Obviously, Harper had an amazing year last year. Castellanos is off to a great start. Schwarber's just going to be fun. Realmuto is going to hit. Hoskins is going to hit. Gregorius is going to hit. Bryson Stott didn't hit, but maybe he can come up and fix it. There's too much talent on this offense that if they pitch well, this is easily an 85, 86 win team. And if a ball bounces this way or that, who knows? That could be enough to get them in the playoff contention.
I completely agree with you. And I think Zach Wheeler is going to come around. He had a shortened spring training because he had a bit of a shoulder issue. He got flu-like symptoms when he was getting ramped up to get ready for not starting opening day because of that shoulder issue, but for that first series. And of course, spring training shortened already this year because of everything going on with the lockout. So, and on top of that, last year in his Cy Young runner-up season, he was rode heavy by this team. A lot of innings, a lot of workload. So it's something that I think it's just going to take him a little bit more time to work in. I don't doubt the ability. I just think it's a slower start for him. And I'm fine with that because this offense has had its dips And the bullpen is not where we thought it was going to be, even though you didn't think it was going to be a great bullpen. They've shown
but think
flashes.
of where they were a couple of years. They
were the worst in the history.
They were the worst in the history of baseball.
Yeah,
so let's just talk about what we're dealing here. We're like, oh, this is not a great bullpen. It was horrific. It was Stephen King level horrifying before.
It was. But like what I'm looking at is you bring in these guys, and I don't think they're bad, but they had just a couple days ago the worst ERA in baseball as far as the bullpen's concerned. Like they're not that bad, is what I'm saying. Like they're going to be middle of the road, and that's going to be a significant improvement over what they've had in past years.
Mediocre is better than terrible.
Absolutely.
Is better than yikes. And they've had yikes. I mean, think about so many of those series that just got away from the Phillies in the last couple of years where, if their bullpen was even adequate, like last year, if their bullpen was adequate, they may have won 90 games.
Absolutely. 2020, they win the division.
Exactly. Yeah. In the COVID season, right. They would have won it. So I think, I don't know. I think, sometimes I have an interesting perspective. I'm going to do this lockdown philosophy here. I have an interesting perspective on East Coast baseball now that I live on the West Coast. And don't get me wrong, I lived up in the Bay Area when the Giants were winning those World Series. And I live here now. I was here for the Dodgers series, and fans, I mean, the Dodgers were one of the biggest draws in all of baseball. And they got, I was just there a couple of weeks ago. There's 50,000 people there. They draw millions of people. And guess what? Angels do too. Guess what? The Giants draw like crazy too. There are super passionate fans who love their baseball. And it's not insane. And I've been able to sort of, as a sociologist, take a look back with a couple of mountain ranges in between 3,000 miles to look at how the Northeasterners talk about baseball. And I see some of the insanity of it. And I know when I was there, I was as guilty as anybody. But the knee-jerk reaction to every tiny pitfall, whether you're in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, wherever, you sit there and go like, would you let the 162-game season unfold?
You're totally right. You're totally right. And here's what the comment has.
I just say you're a call-in radio guy, so yes. I mean, you're like, I'm watching it from afar. You're in the microscope, looking at the amoeba sort of going around there.
I hear from hundreds of people every day who call in and want to fire this coach and want to move on from this player. Part of it, I think, is because at least in Philadelphia, it's such a football-centric fan base. Even though they love their baseball, it's always an Eagles town. So when you look at that, you look at a 17-game season for the NFL, and every loss feels magnified. And that's what people in this area grow up on. So when they look at losses in other sports, it happens with the Sixers and the Flyers as well. Not quite as lengthy as the MLB season, but still 82 games. Mm-hmm. And every game feels like you're hitting the nuclear panic button because they're used to one game impacting so much with the Eagles. So it does take over the mentality and how people are raised as sports fans, at least in Philly. And then the Northeast just naturally. Just a tenser, faster pace. You got to get everything done quickly. So when you're off to the slow start, it affects people more up here. So it's certainly the case. And I have to fight it myself, being in the Northeast my whole life. And even though I know I've seen baseball seasons over and over and over again, I know it doesn't matter until June, July, and you can see teams in last place at that point at the All-Star break. They'll come back, get in, and find a way to win a World Series. But it's hard to fight against that nature of just this area and how fans are brought up and how they react to even losing an early season series to the Milwaukee Brewers or the Colorado Rockies.
It's funny. Like I'm not a huge football fan. I don't dislike football. I just don't follow it.
I got you.
And I didn't grow up in a big football house. When I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, the Patriots stunk.
Yeah.
There was the Steve Grogan that 1 year they went to the Super Bowl and they got clobbered. But most of the time, and they played way out in Foxborough, this nasty aluminum stadium. And this was the era of Larry Bird and all them. So obviously everyone was cheering for the Celtics. But we were a big baseball house.
Right.
And so I understood, especially watching, there was a bunch of years where it was, I found out the opposite, that the Red Sox would get off to this super hot start. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, here we go. here we go. And then they would fade, and then the Orioles or the Tigers or the Yankees, whoever would wind up going to the playoffs. And because I grew up, I kind of maybe have a different point of view of following the sports team and understanding that it's like tides. That there's, the best teams, like, the 1998 Yankees lost 45 games or something like that. I mean, it's going to happen. But also, if I grew up on football, you're right. A two-game losing streak, when you have only 16 games, compare that to 162 games in baseball. A 2-game losing streak in football is like a 20-game losing streak in baseball.
Right.
Like, imagine you woke up and we lost in the last 2 games. Oh, okay. Well, you're gonna play tomorrow. But if you lost 20 straight games in baseball, like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, that's fire everybody territory.
But then again, if you can go back-to-back wins, then you're the Moneyball A's. So I mean, it's you're right. That is a mentality, and I'll just say, just for my own self, that's one of the reasons why I love baseball. You could have this, like the Mets and the Cardinals played this unbelievably exciting game on Monday evening, and it was a great pitchers matchup. There was heroics. There was weird errors. It was Bananaville. And guess what? They have to play the next day.
Yep.
And that's what I love. It's that comfort food. I go drive home from work. I'm going to listen to a ball game.
Yeah, and they all count the same and everything like that. It's absolutely right. You brought up tides, though. In Philadelphia, often it feels like there aren't tides, they're tidal waves. It's just everything crashes down on you the time a game gets lost, even if it only matters for 1 of 162. It's a tough nature to be. But
and I made this point this week, the 2 things that I will say that if you are I think it's more so in the American League than the National League this year, that it's going to be so bunched together. That when you have a head-to-head matchup with one of your rivals, even if it's in April, you got to get those wins in. You got to at least pile those wins up so you're not trying to make up for them later. And the other thing is, when you're this early in the season, you're going to have games where you lose. You're going to have a couple of games where you get the doors blown off. And there's going to be some games that are going to be frustrating that, do you know what? We went up against a great pitching staff. Tip your hat. That happened to the Red Sox the other day when they were no hit through 9 innings and they wound up losing an extra. You kind of got to tip your hat, go like, look, they just were great. What you want to avoid are dumb losses. Just those losses like you made mistakes, a mental error, you brought in the wrong pitcher, someone made a base running blunder, because those are the games when you go back, you're like, we missed the playoffs by 1 game, and you look back, and remember that game? The guy ran through the stop sign. We could have won that game. You don't lose the dumb games.
Yeah, and the Phillies haven't had any dumb losses yet this year, in my opinion. They've had games where the offense is slumped. They've had games where they've had bad starting pitching performances. They've had games where the bullpen just didn't show up when you needed them to. But in each game, it felt like there was a flash of something, even if they haven't fully put it together yet. And that's why I'm not worried about this team, because I've seen that the offense can be elite, that the starting pitching, we know that they have talent there, that the bullpen has had games where they've had to come in early innings, like the 4th inning. There was a game where Nick Nelson threw like 3 perfect innings for this team in relief.
Yep.
And you're looking at like, okay, these guys have ability. We talked about bullpens in the past, how there were guys that shouldn't be on a major league roster. That's not this year's team. So when they figure it all out and they go on that stretch where all the facets of the game kind of come together, they're going to be a really good ball club. And you're right, they're going to be an 85, 86. They could push up to 90 wins if things bounce their way. So I'm not worried about them. It's just when you see the offense slump and you pay this amount of money, the average fan sees that and they think, well, I was told they were supposed to hit 8 home runs a game, and now I'm going to panic because they just got shut out. It's just a tough mentality early in the season when you expect something a certain way, and you've got to let it more shake out.
Well, what I got to say to some of those fans who are like hitting the panic button based upon how things are going when we're less than 20 games in the season is just remember that, Wheeler is a legitimate Cy Young contender when healthy. If he gets himself going and Nola gets himself going, Harper's going to start to hit. Schwarber's going to at least be hitting a few moonshots out of there. Then it's just going to be an easy bet to say that the Phillies are going to be a winning season. You're going to have a winning season for their fans, and it's going to be exciting. If you're going to make any bets, go to BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. BetOnline is where the game starts. Crossing over with Connor Thomas. That sounded like crossing over with John Edwards. No, we're not doing that kind of crossing over. We're talking Phillies. So Connor, you have memories of the Ryan Howard years and everything like that. One of my early childhood memories of the World Series was the 1980 World Series. I had a bunch of cousins who grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and were huge Phillies fans. And so I didn't think the Red Sox were allowed to go to the playoffs when I was a kid. I used to think how it worked was they'd play 162 games, and at the end, the Phillies played the Dodgers and the Royals played the Yankees.
Exactly.
And it was like an invitation. And they were all huge Phillies fans. And so when they won the World Series, I was so happy for my cousins, and I used to pretend I was Tug McGraw. The first National League game I ever saw was a Phillies-Mets game, and I got to see Schmidt. I got to see Pete Rose. That was in the strike year of '81. Now, I also went. I went to the Vet. I went to games at the Vet.
Yeah, that was a place for sure.
Yeah. Did you ever go? Was the Vet before your time, or was it always?
No, I'd been to game at the Vets, but I was a young kid, and I always say that the Vet is where every kid in Philadelphia used to learn their 4-letter words, because that's what it was, the 700 level, and you'd be sitting up there, and every word in the book was getting thrown out. It was a hostile environment. The field was hard. The fans were harder. It was a crazy place. And I remember it a little bit as a kid being my introduction to Philadelphia sports. But really, my main time growing up was the bank.
Yeah. I have to say a few things in defense of the Vet. The cookie cutter parks of St. Louis and Philadelphia and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Atlanta, they have been maligned and talked about like they all had to be knocked down. I wish they saved one of them. And the one I wish they saved was St. Louis. Because St. Louis, there was so much history in that one that if it was the only one left, then it would be unique. And some of the new stadiums are all starting to look alike to me. So oddly, they've become a new cookie cutter. I mean, I can't tell the difference between the new Cardinal Stadium and the new stadium where the Nationals play. And I think there's no character in that stadium where the Rangers play, where they played the COVID World Series.
Right.
But I've not been to the bank. I've only been to the Vet. And the Vet seemed to the knock the cookie cutter parks got was they didn't have any character. And I say BS to that. The Vet did. The Vet felt like Philadelphia. Philadelphia, if you've not been to Philadelphia, it's, first of all, I mentioned before, I'm a Revolutionary War buff, so I mean it has the historic element. Philadelphia, watch Rocky, okay? Because I know you have. I'm talking about other people.
Of course.
There seems to be no rhyme or reason in Philadelphia. I'm in a nice neighborhood. I'm in a rough neighborhood. Oh, this place is really nice. Oh my God, I better run for my life. It just sort of like there's a lot of, that's why the movie Trading Places was so perfect. It was in Philadelphia, is that there's so many like kind of rundown areas right next to this really wealthy area, right next to another place. There's a toughness to Philadelphia and a rough around the edges part of Philadelphia that I thought the Vet kind of symbolized. The fact that they had a jail in the stadium, it was, you had to be a tough player to make it in Philadelphia. But if you made it in Philadelphia, it was amazing. And partly it was because, for me, I guess, I came of age as a sports fan, and Philadelphia had the Eagles made the playoffs. The Phillies won the World Series. Dr. J and Moses Malone were leading the Sixers to the playoffs, and they won a title. And, Balboa just beat Clubber Lang. There was always a lot of the Philadelphia was like a glamour place of champions.
Yeah,
And
well,
the vet was kind of tough. Yeah.
80 had all of the teams go at least. So
Yeah.
the Phillies won it, but the Sixers were in it, the Flyers were in it, the Eagles in it, and unfortunately you lost 3 or 4, which is kind of the story of Philadelphia. But those were the days, and that kind of created what the vet was with the Eagles and the Phillies both playing there. No, you're absolutely right. And it collected the ethos of Philadelphia. I remember watching the vet get knocked down from the Navy Yard here in Philadelphia, sitting on the top of my dad's truck because he worked in the Navy Yard, and seeing that building come down, even though I was young and it wasn't really as much part of my experience because I was a young kid. It's so revered still. And people kind of have not so much pushback because Citizens Bank Park is a beautiful park.
Yeah, it looks
one of the
gorgeous.
nice modern parks. It's a great place to watch a game, but they're still kind of, but it's not the 700 level. It's not the toughness. It's not what that generation was raised on. And you're right about just the ethos of the city and what the city's drawn to. It's a neighborhood, very like family feel, but it's one of those families that had 8 boys all in an order, and they all fight, and they're all getting playground scraps and everything like that. And even though they're family, they're all a little bit different and rough around the edge. It's what it feels like being here, and that's what the vet embodied, and that's what fans here want these sports teams to embody. You want to be the tough player. And we care more about, almost to a fault in Philadelphia, the tough player over the talented player. Like one of the most talked about guys in this city's baseball history, Aaron Rowan, gets talked about like he was Babe Ruth because he ran into the center field fence once and broke his nose. Yeah. It's just like he wasn't a slouch player, but this city values toughness, sometimes even over skill, and that's just the nature of Philadelphia.
Yeah. But they're in a weird place, even geographically. It's like, Boston is like the insecure, smarter brother of New York. Mm-hmm. New York is the middle son who hit it big. Okay. Philadelphia is the tough brother who thinks he's as good as the other ones. Baltimore, man, we had such high hopes for you, Baltimore. And Washington is the adopted son who studied. But
it's not bad.
I just made that up. I was just trying to think, but that's what the different city. They have very different personalities, and it comes through their sports team. But hey, look at Connor Thomas. Where do you do your sports talk?
So I'm on 97.5 The Fanatic, Sports Talk Radio. I'm on the morning show, the John Kincaid show there. And I've been doing that for a couple years. You can hear me in the mornings, bright and early, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m.
All right. That's the way to go. Well, hey, Connor, this was a lot of fun having you on. You and I have been playing a little bit of email tag to try to get this going here. So I'm glad we finally lined everything up here. So that's where they can listen to you on the radio. Where can they listen to in their earbuds with your podcast?
Of course, Locked On Phillies. You can find us anywhere that they do your podcast. Locked On Phillies on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Phillies. And I retweet everything from my personal account at Connor Thomas 975. So all of those platforms, you can find everything we put out on Locked On Phillies. I know we've talked about how worried people are about the Phillies this early. It's going to be a fun year. It's an incredibly fun team.
Hey, you have Castellanos, Harper, and Schwarber. It's worth the price of admission just to watch those three in the lineup together. I mean, that's going to be so much fun watching those three guys just swinging from their heels and putting some runs up on the board. So
chicks dig the long ball, Sully, and this team's going to have plenty of them by the time this season's over. So it'll be a fun year. And come along with us on Locked On Phillies.
And it's going to be a long year where I'm going to have a lot of fun talking baseball up and down. You can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on both Twitter and on Instagram. And I guess Mr. Musk, if you're listening, if you can just verify me, that'd be great. Thanks a lot. And you can follow me on Twitter at Sully Baseball. And on Instagram, I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast. I don't remember my MySpace handle. Talking about the Phillies with Connor Thomas here on the 27th day of April, 2022. This is the Locked On MLB, Locked On Phillies crossover. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.
What a fun crossover with Sully, man. He's a joy to talk to, and that man knows his history of baseball. Been around for a minute, a little bit longer than me, but don't tell him I said that. No, that was fun. Thank you for joining us for another great episode of Locked On Phillies. Normally, this is where I plug Locked On MLB as your second listen, but today it was a crossover. It was basically your first listen. That's exactly why you should check out Locked On MLB, because you get crossovers like that, not just from me, your favorite host, but other hosts around Major League Baseball on our Locked On network. So go ahead and check out Sully and all of his work at Locked On MLB, wherever you get your podcasts. That's all I've got for you today, and we will talk to you tomorrow.